In this Seeds of Literacy Math Club video, we'll be going a little bit more into detail on how to do the long division that we worked on in our first video about our trail mix project. So if you haven't watched that video yet, I'd recommend that you go to the link that's in the description of this video and start out by watching that video first. But if you're here because you want a little bit more detail on division and long division and different ways to do it to solve the problem of how many ounces are in a cup of rice Chex, you've come to the right place. So we talked about initially that we put a fraction together where we could make that calculation. Another way to look at 12 over 11 is as a division problem. And you might have seen that if you've been converting fractions into decimals. So let's start that off. Let's do a division problem. And remember, with division problems, it's good to keep your columns really well lined up. So if you're just getting kind of started into long division, sometimes it's good to work with graph paper to keep things lined up. Or another way I like to do it is to use a sheet of paper to keep things lined. So I'll show you how to do that, if that might help you. So if we look at this fraction, 12 over 11, the way to look at that as a division problem is 11 into 12. Or another way to say that is 12 divided by 11. So we would write 12 divided by 11 like this. And you might want to take a moment to pause and to solve that problem and figure out if you are just starting to learn long division, figure out what the remainder is. Or you could figure it out with your answer that has a fraction in it. Or if you want, you can figure it out as a decimal number. And it's going to be a long decimal number, so just take it to one decimal place. Actually, take it to two decimal places and round it to 1. And then I'll show you how to do all three of those. Okay, so let's take these one at a time. And first we'll do the remainder method. So remember I mentioned you can use a sheet of paper or some graph paper. If you use a sheet of paper, you can do it like this. You can say, does 11 go into 1? No, it doesn't. You slide it over. Does 11 go into 12? Yes, it does. It goes into 12 one time. 1. And 1 times 11 is 11. And you're going to subtract. 2 minus 1 is 1. And 1 minus 1 is 0. Some people like to put the 0 there. You don't really need to. If it's a 0 that's on this end, or if it's a 0 that's on that end after a long decimal, you don't really need it, but it doesn't hurt anything if it's there. Okay, so let's look at our answer. So 11 into 12, or 12 divided by 11, is 1, remainder 1. That's one way to look at it. 1, remainder 1. Okay, another way to look at it is with a fraction. So we could say that 12 divided by 11, it's also equal to 1 and 1/11. Now that should look familiar to you because we already figured out from this improper fraction that it's 1 and 1/11. Okay, so it's good when things check out like that. Okay, so either of those is a correct answer, but let's figure it out as a decimal for those who are familiar with how to do that. And if you haven't done that yet, that's okay, we'll get to it eventually. Okay, so let's look at that. We'll say 11, 12. Okay, does 11 go into 1? No. Does it go into 12? Yes. It goes once, as we said before. 1 times 11 is 11. Then we subtract, and we said that we end up with 1 here. Okay, well now we've got to keep going because we want to have decimals. So let's put our decimal point here and our decimal point here because it's going to go right up above the bar too. Okay, but we don't have anything yet to bring down. So let's add a 0 here. We'll extend this out a little bit. So we'll add a 0 there. We'll bring that 0 down to here. Now, let's look at this. Does 11 go into 10? No, it doesn't. But we need to bring more stuff down, but we've got a gap there. So we've got to fill that with a 0. Now we can bring another 0 down. So now we'll look at this. Does 11 go into 100? Yes, it does. And you might remember that when you're multiplying 11s, you end up with things like 99, 88, 77. So we know that 99 is pretty close to 100. So that's probably going to be a 9 there. 9 times 11 is 99. And remember that you need to make that 99 go right up against this edge. We'll subtract. Okay, so now we got to do some borrowing. So 100 minus 99, well, you can probably know that that's going to be 1. But let's figure it out. So we need to borrow something, but we can't borrow it from that because that's already a 0. So we have to go over to here, cross that one out, make that a 0, make that a 10. Now that that's a 10, we can borrow from that 10, make that a 9. Now we've got something that we can borrow. So 10 minus 9 is 1. Okay? Now, we're going to keep going. We could keep going with this big long decimal number. And actually what will happen is it's going to be 09090909 forever. But one of the things that we said was we want to round to the nearest tenth. So when we want to round to the nearest tenth, that's 1 decimal place. So we want to figure out whether this number stays a 0 or whether it gets rounded up to a 1. And we do that by looking at its neighbor. If its neighbor is from 0 to 4, we keep it a 0. If his neighbor is from 5 to 9, we round that up to a 1. So since it's a 9, we're going to make this a 1. So our approximate answer is 1.1. So that's the decimal equivalent of 12 divided by 11. Okay? So we know that we have, for ounces per cup of Rice Chex, a cup of Rice Chex weighs 1.1 ounces per cup. So every cup of Rice Chex weighs 1.1 ounces.